Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy.
Thank you for listening to the Words and Nerds and Talking Aussie Books podcast mashup. I'm Dani Vee from the Words and Nerds podcast, and today Claudine Tinellis, podcast host of Talking Aussie Books, and I come together for a bookish and podcast chat. How are you, Claudine?
I'm really well, Dani. Thanks so much for having me on today.
This is so good, and I am trying to speak to more podcasters because I don't know about you, but I don't get to speak to many. What about you?
I definitely don't. So I think this is probably the first podcast mashup I've ever done. I'm very excited about it.
So we can nerd up, talk about podcasts. We're going to talk about books too. So there'll be a bit of both.
Most definitely.
That's what we're about. Now, can you tell us your podcast, Talking Aussie Books, hit me with an elevator pitch as to what your podcast does?
I mean, it's exactly what the name suggests. I talk about Aussie books. So it aims to shine a spotlight on Australian fiction writing by connecting readers and writers of Australian fiction. Simple.
Beautiful. And that was a great elevator pitch. You've done that before, right?
I don't know if I've really done it in a formal setting like this, but yeah, most definitely I've had to explain why it is that I do what I do and what my podcast is all about. So yeah, it's super simple. No need to think about that one. So, what about you, Dani? What's your elevator pitch?
Yeah, well, Words and Nerds just talks about books, and I do every genre, whatever I feel like, really, whatever interests me. But what I really wanted it to be was conversational, enthusiastic, but also not just talk about books, but talk about stories and talk about how books and stories reflect the world, because I like the author and myself to try and have, really authentic chats. We get a bit vulnerable, a bit deep, a bit silly, depends on the book, depends on the person. And what I really like to do is just talk about not only literature, but how it reflects the world and how we can maybe make a better world through talking about these issues. And sometimes they're difficult issues. Sometimes we just have heaps of fun with the kids episodes, the kid lit episodes. We just do really silly things. But sometimes we get real deep and talk about the world. So kind of anything goes really on the Words and Nerds podcast.
I love it. And I think you do such a fantastic job. And in terms of enthusiasm, man, you got this, girl.
It was funny. One of my friends said he listens to podcasts on double time so he can get through them, half the time of what the podcast actually is. And he says, I tried to listen to your podcast on double time and you were like a chipmunk. He said, you speak so fast already. He said, I can't double time yours. And I went, oh, I'm sorry, but I'm just really enthusiastic about books.
Here's the thing about podcasting, and I think that a lot of listeners do understand and can perceive genuineness, if that's a word, in terms of podcasting. I think you really have to be a genuine person. You really have to love what it is that you do, because let's face it, there's not a great deal of upside in it for us podcasters. There's lots of work involved in it, but I think you really, really have to do it for the love of it and be passionate about what you do.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think it's how you measure success. And it's so easy to measure success by money, how successful is X? And that's determined by monetary value. Whereas I've really tried to take that sort of out of my life. Of course, we all need money to survive, unfortunately, but we need it. But I've really tried to take that out of the equation of the podcast, because I think, well, how many other rewards do I get from it? I get to speak to amazing people. I get so many books that find me that I wouldn't have found before that I love. And, it is an outlet for my anxiety. So I don't know about you, but that was sort of my reasons for starting it. Why did you start your podcast?
Yeah, look, I had a number of reasons for starting this podcast, and obviously I'm an aspiring writer, and so I've been writing probably seriously since about 2016. I released a non-fiction book in 2014, but what I really wanted to do was to write fiction. That was my first love. And so in 2016, I'd finished my first practice kind of manuscript and started looking around to, listen to other Australian authors in terms of what their journey was and their experiences were, and I turned to podcasts. I really only discovered podcasts in about 2017. So around that time, I started looking towards podcasts as a way of trying to get information about other Australian authors and what their journeys to publication was like. And what I found was, I mean, there are a number of fantastic Australian podcasts out there, but nothing that regularly devoted time to speaking with Australian authors in the fiction space. And so that's why I decided to start my own. And I really decided that it was going to be a podcast solely about Australian fiction and Australian fiction writers. And through the podcast, I wanted to learn their journeys, you know, the tips and tricks. I was really hungry for information about how they did or how they do what they do and how they got to where they are now. And I just found that that was just such a wonderful thing. And, you know, just backtracking on what I said before, there, you know, when I said there's little upside to podcasting, I didn't mean, you know, that in a personal sense. For me, it's been such a rich experience, and I have learnt so much and been able to connect with so many amazing people, present company included, of course. And the books that I get and the people that I've met and, you know, the readers that I've been able to connect with has just been phenomenal. And that's, you simply cannot put a price on them.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just such a nice book community. You know, I don't think I've ever been part of a community that's so positive, that's so uplifting of each other, that celebrates each other's work. And, you know, it's just such a nice place to be. Sometimes the world can be a little harsh and a little hard, but you come into this little book universe and everyone is like, yay, look what everyone's doing. Look at this beautiful book. Look what I read. And it's just such a lovely world to be part of, I think.
Absolutely. And the fact that we get to speak to these people and to try and uncover their inspiration and these wonderful experiences they have, and that we get to learn from these journeys, I think does make the world a better place. And I think, you know, there are so many, you know, people that, you know, would classify themselves as introverts, who don't maybe have a large social circle, but who are able to connect with other book lovers through listening to podcasts and online communities. And I think it's a really wonderful thing.
Yeah, I agree. Now, you say you're an aspiring writer. I'm trying to finish something because I abandon everything because I have that whole, you know, never good enough syndrome. So I'm finally, I think, at the end of something. I don't know what that is, but something. But in terms of helping you with your own writing, how or what have you had any specific advice or listened to a writer's story that's really resonated with you and you're like, oh, like click, that's what I need to do?
Yeah, numerous times, Dani. So on my podcast, what I do is I actually ask every author that I interview if they might be able to offer some tips to aspiring writers like me who listen to the podcast. And I have a lot of feedback from a lot of people who say that they find those tip sections to be really informative, and it helps people to understand that they're not alone in this writing journey, that everybody who's trying to write something, whether it's a memoir, whether it's, you know, another fiction book, or a non-fiction book, I think, you know, writers' processes are essentially very similar and their experiences are very similar. And so I think listening to other writers tell me about their experiences and, you know, the fact that they might have had 10 manuscripts, you know, stuffed in the drawer before they got their first publishing deal, whether it's, you know, 10 or whether it's 4 or whatever the case may be. I think it really helps aspiring writers to know that that's a normal part of the journey, and rejection is a normal part of the journey, that not everybody gets the book deal first go. And so, yes, I would have to say to you that really does help me. And a lot of the times I think, oh, my goodness, that's exactly what I do. And it helps to know that somebody who's, you know, 10 or 15 books down the track has been in my position at some time or another.
Yeah, it is really comforting, isn't it? And I think that's opened up, you know, a world for me, because you just get this beautiful book in your hands, which is perfect, and it tells this beautiful story. But then when you really dig deep, you see where it started and the incredible amount of work that goes into making it that beautiful book. And I'm the same. This is my sort of university of writing,
Yeah.
I guess.
I love that. Yeah.
And, you know, I've learned lots from people. I think Trent Dalton said it really nicely when he said that, he puts his heart and soul on the page, and you can have all the technical stuff in the world, but if you don't put your heart and soul on the page, like, what's the point? And I love that. So I try and think about that, because I think I'm a very technical writer because I come from an English teacher background. And sometimes you've just got to put that aside and go, no, like, what am I trying to say? What am I feeling? And how can I put that heart and soul on the page? And as we know with Trent's books, particularly, Boy Swallows Universe, he does that very well. Yeah. I think Georgia Richter, I spoke to her recently, and she said her advice, she's an editor, and she said her advice is to take the work as far as it can go. So if you think there's still something I can do here, there's still something that needs to be added, there's still something missing, don't give it to anyone until it's as far as you can go. Because I find that really interesting. And I asked her, how do you know when a piece of work's finished? And she said, art being art, is it ever finished? But take it as far as you can go. So I like that. So if I'm working on something, that's what's in my mind. Is this as far as I can take it? Is this not just my best work, but my absolute furthest that I can go? Then I did some NaNoWriMo, and we did that once a week during November with a bunch of writers. And I think that gave me accountability to finish, to not abandon. And that was, their advice as well. I had a writing group with Julianne Negri, Tristan Banks and Adrian Beck, and it was about getting the words down and finishing something. And that was really important for me as well. So yeah, University of Writing, but I think they're the sort of the hot tips that have helped me through since November.
Absolutely. And look, NaNoWriMo is one of those wonderful things that I think gets people moving and gets people, fast tracking progress through a work in progress. And look, I agree with you, talking to other people and learning how to better yourself and, improving with each project that you work on is a really important thing that we can learn from other people. So anyway, Dani, what I wanted to ask you was, who was the first person you ever interviewed and why?
It was John Larkin, Australian YA author, and I started this podcast with a friend, Chris Buchanan, who he actually has a MasterChef and Bake Off podcast. And I was saying, I want to do it. And he's like, just do it. Didn't know anything about it except, how to listen to a podcast. And he was just like, don't overthink it, just do it. So I did it. And I look back now and I don't mind. I like sort of the growth, I don't mind that they sort of sounded really like I had no idea what I'm doing, because sometimes now I don't know what I'm doing. But, I like that kind of, you can measure the growth, you can see it and hear it. But yeah, so John Larkin, I knew him. He was a friend of mine. I was a teacher for 17 years, and he came in and he was just and spoke to the students and taught them about writing. And he was just such a good bloke that we became friends. Like, he's just one of the nicest humans you'll ever meet. And so when I first started, I thought, well, I'd probably like to speak to someone who A, will say yes, he will speak to me, and B, that, I felt comfortable talking to, and I knew that he was going to be a really nice guy. So we had that lovely chat, the first interview, and yeah, it just started from there. So I'll always be very thankful to John for just taking that chance and having that chat. And I guess that's the same, when you're starting out, you're so grateful to those people that thought, oh yeah, I'll give up my time. We know how precious time is, to give you half an hour when at that point no one had a clue what Words&Nerds was going to be, if it was going to be anything, if anyone was going to listen. I had no idea either. So it was nice that people took that chance. And I'm speaking to Jackie French on Thursday for the second time, and she was episode 10 of mine. And I'm so grateful to Jackie French for taking a chance on a podcast who was 9 episodes in and just had this chat with me. So I'm so grateful. It'd be so nice to speak to her tomorrow, 3.5 years later.
Oh, that is wonderful. I actually interviewed Jackie towards the end of last year, in fact, and a nicer person you couldn't meet. So it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that she took a chance on a small podcast, because she did exactly the same thing for me, even though I'm a couple of years down the track. But, I often wonder, have they even heard of Talking Aussie Books? And, these amazing authors who are so prolific and have produced so many wonderful books, and they get asked to be interviewed by somebody they've probably never heard of. And it always surprises me that they're so generous with their time and, talk to you as if, you're the most important person at that time for them. So it is a wonderful feeling. And that's wonderful. I look forward to hearing Jackie on your podcast again.
Yeah, me too. I'm really looking forward to it. Although I always, still, you get really nervous when people, like Jackie French, she's pretty much writing royalty and speaking to her. You think, I want to I don't want to waste her time. I want to ask her valuable questions. So, I'm probably not going to sleep for the next 2 nights, but that'll be fine. Claudine, we spoke earlier about being a team of one. So, one Aussie Books, one Words and Nerds. So we don't really have a team, I guess. But is there anyone that helps you out or who bounces ideas off? Because I've found a couple of people who, have either done a couple of spin-offs or who co-host with me and who are happy to sort of bounce ideas or give me ideas, which I find really helpful, because I think sometimes being a team of one, it's a lot of pressure and sometimes it's hard.
Yeah, it is a lot of pressure. Yeah, most definitely I'm a team of one. I don't really have any anyone that I ask specifically about the podcast, but I have a group of writing mates that, I speak with quite frequently. Sandy Docker, Cassie Hamer, Shelley Gardner, the author stalker, Rose Putty, another podcaster. So, we talk a lot, and if I've got any issues, I guess I could always bounce ideas off them, and, they'd always help me out. But in terms of like day-to-day running of the podcast, it really is just me making decisions and, dealing with publishers and publicists and books coming in and deciding, which interviews to run with. And I think that's it. And it really is a lot of pressure, actually.
It's nice to have people to run things past us. So, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? Is this a stupid idea? Is this a good idea?
Yeah, I must say it must be the lawyer in me. I'm kind of a bit rigid. Like once I've decided on a formula, I kind of just go with it, and it's it works for me. Yeah. And I just have this, it's a known quantity for me. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I think I'm just comfortable in that. There may come a time where I have to think a little bit more laterally about what I'm doing and whether or not it's working, whether people are enjoying. At the moment, everybody seems to be enjoying the interviews that I conduct, and authors seem to enjoy being interviewed. So at the moment, it's, status quo.
It's really interesting how you said your job, as a lawyer, you feel like that makes you rigid. Well, maybe it just makes you, really organised and knowing what you want. Whereas for me, I was a teacher for 17 years. And I think being a teacher and a head teacher for 11 of those, you're very sort of have to be creative all the time. You can plan this amazing lesson and the kids might hate it, or something goes terribly wrong, or the technology works. So you're like, right, what am I going to do now for 30 minutes with, 30, 16-year-olds? So you're always sort of having to think on your feet and be creative and do that. So I think my brain is still sort of fireworking, So going, oh, what can I do now? Oh, what about this? What about this? Oh, what about this? So I do think it's important, like you say, to have that core structure and format, which I do too. But then I've been doing a couple of spin-off series as well, like the summer series spin-off, and I've got Ben Hobson. He's starting the burgers, beers and books spin-off, so everyone's really excited about that. Me too. He's such a great interviewer. He's so natural. You just feel like you're at a pub eating a schnitzel with him. So I'm so looking forward to that. And we're doing an inside publishing one soon, so that'll be a bit of an insight into the publishing industry, which I think will be cool. So I think my brain is just a bit of a firework. It's like, oh, bang, bang, bang.
You know what, Dani, I have to say, and I did say it to you before we started recording, that I have a great deal of admiration for you. You're so prolific, and you've got like 280 episodes or something. I mean, that's just phenomenal in the time that you've been running. I mean, that's incredible. So more power to you that you've got all these wonderful ideas sparking in your head all the time. And I feel like I'm just like, well, this is what I do, I just sit in my little box here and this is what I do. But I'm happy with that, and I'm happy with, the way that I'm approaching it.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a right or wrong way. Sometimes I think I'm too noisy and I'm too loud and I need to calm down a bit, and stop putting so many episodes out and just take a day off social media. But I just get really excited about things. So I think, we were talking before about authenticity, and we're talking about being genuine. You've just got to be that person. And if it annoys some people, well, you can't please everybody. You'll find your tribe who don't mind that, enthusiasm or whatever. But I don't think there's a right or wrong way. I think you got to do what's right for you. For me, this is such a creative outlet that just calms my anxiety. It puts that anxiety into creating something positive. And I don't know, I think maybe because I've been doing it for 3.5 years, even though it seems a lot, like I just have it down pat. So I interview Tuesdays and or Thursdays, and I try and keep most interviews down to 30 minutes, like a very sort of formulaic sort of 9 questions, 30 minutes. So then when you edit, it doesn't take that long. To be honest, I don't sleep a whole lot. I try to sleep, never works for me. So I just, again, accept that self and go, I'm only ever going to get, 5 or 6 hours sleep. Sometimes I'll go to bed at 9:30 and try and do that thing that you think's healthy for you and go, right, really? And I just lay there for 3 hours. So I may as well edit a podcast. I may as well read a book because it's not happening. My brain does not want to sleep for 8 hours.
One of the questions that I really wanted to ask you, and knowing how prolific you are and how many podcast episodes you get out, in the course of a week, and I just sit here like wiping the sweat off my brow thinking, oh my God, how is she doing all of that? So I wondered, how do you juggle your work, your writing, your reading and your preparation for podcasting? What does your typical week look like?
Okay. So I have little kids as well. I've got 2 little kids. And so they go to bed at 7 o'clock. And so they're asleep by 8. So then from 8 o'clock is sort of my time to do whatever I want. So Tuesdays and Thursdays I put aside for podcasting. My brain likes to write in the morning. So I put a time aside Saturdays and Sundays where I actually just stay in my bed and write for sort of 2 hours every morning, and people know just to leave me alone. So we've all got our routine. During the week, I try and squeeze in some writing or editing, but I'm a bit brain dead by, the time I'm working and things like that. I don't watch a lot of television, I must say. Not because I don't like television, just because I had to give up something. I can't do all the editing and the podcasting and watch TV. So I probably maybe watch TV once a week. Yep. Then I stay up late editing, and I'm a very fast reader. I think when I was an English teacher, I would read multiple books simultaneously, and I think I just get really fast at reading. So you're right, I probably do need to slow down, but at the moment I feel like I don't know, it's working at the moment. I'm probably going to burn out shortly, but that's okay because you can always pull back, instead of I'm releasing 3 a week at the moment, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but the world's not going to end if it goes to 2 or back to 1. So I'll just do what I can now. And if I get too tired and too burnt out, I'll go back to 1. What I do need to do, Claudine, is be better at saying no. Yeah. Because I get all these beautiful books and I'm like, I have to speak to this person and this. How do you do it? How do you say no? Teach me the ways.
Well, I'm terrible at it as well. And, I get told off by my family. They're saying, you say yes all the time and you're doing too much. And, it's a lot of pressure, but I feel like I don't want to let people down. And, it's having a podcast, comes with a bit of a responsibility because to some extent you have a platform where you can, push out news of all these wonderful books that are coming out onto the shelves. And I feel like, going back to the reason why I started talking Aussie books, I used to go into bookshops and get really frustrated that I wouldn't see a lot of Australian books on the shelves. A lot of the time you go in and you see the New York Times bestsellers, taking up a whole shelf. And I just feel like we've got so many amazing, talented Australian authors here that we really do need to be spotlighting them a little bit more. Anyway, to go back to that. So, yes, saying no is quite difficult. I think publishers now have got the idea that I will, usually interview an author if I get their book. Very rarely I say no. For example, I get sometimes sent memoirs and I don't do interviews on memoirs. And, if I feel like my audience isn't going to really respond well, I've kind of got a sense of the kinds of books that people like to hear about, then I might say no, but it's very rare. So I'm not any good.
So that you're not going to help me at all.
No, I'm afraid not.
And I was going to ask, how do you choose your books? Because like you said, you don't do memoirs. So I know you talked about audience and thinking about what they respond to, but is there something or a genre or a writer or a type of book that you just know that, I have to do this one?
Yeah, it usually comes down to whether or not it's something that I would like to read. So if it's a book that's calling to me or I've read a book by that author before, or it's in a genre that I just cannot go past, I will usually just say yes, let's book in an interview. Less so if it's somebody that I'm not familiar with, or their writing I'm not familiar with their writing. But, having said that, I will always read the book and then, decide whether or not it's something I'm happy to go ahead with. Occasionally I get requests from people and I feel like it's just not something I can interview somebody about for a variety of reasons. In that case, I will usually offer to do a review and just so that, I'm still using my platform, but, it takes time to do the podcast like we were talking about before. I will read the book. Like you research the author and you prepare for the interview and then you edit the interview and then you've got to spend time pushing it out on social media and, posting it to your platform. So there's a great work involved in a podcast episode. So I can't, and just because it's only one of me and there's only so many hours during the day and I am doing my own writing, I have my own family and work stuff to get on with, it is, although I do want to say yes to everybody, it's just not possible to say yes.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It sounds like we're living parallel lives. Cool.
I would say so, Dani. I would say so. So I wanted to ask you, if you had your time over, would you do anything differently?
It's an interesting question because it's easy to say, I wish I had known about the right mic or known tech better or, had better equipment or knew what I was doing. But I actually I do cringe a bit when I go back and listen to the first episodes. But I also like that growth. I think if things are too shiny, I think people kind of don't relate to them. But if things are also not cared about as well, that's not good because people don't think, if they're a bit unprofessional, it looks like you don't care about them. So I think I don't know what it looks like, but I try and strike that balance between being, not that I could ever be too shiny. So I it's not even an option, but
stop.
Being somewhere between that, because I think part of what people like about our podcast is that we're real people, we're vulnerable people, we have real lives and families. We have as little time as everybody else. We're juggling multiple things at a time and we just really love books. And I think if you became that sort of shiny persona with this perfect podcast, it wouldn't work. It's not kind of our market, So I'd like to honestly say that I probably wouldn't change anything because I really like the fact that the podcast came out of nowhere and nobody listened. And I was just hoping maybe my mum would listen. And then it kind of is something, like I don't know what it is, but people listen. I engage with people on social media. In 2020, I think people were so bored that, the listens tripled in number.
And how good is that?
How good is that? There has to be something good that came out of the pandemic, I guess, because not a lot of other good things came out of it. But yeah, so you find your people and you find an audience. So I of course you'd rather it sound a bit more professional, whatever. But I think I'm trying to think that I'm glad I wouldn't change anything, because had I not sort of not known what I was doing and didn't sort of feel challenged and struggled and vulnerable and like I was never good enough, I don't think I would have gotten here authentically, So I think that kind of climbing the rung little by little, I think that brings you to where you are now. And I think it makes you very grateful that you've become part of the community, so grateful that people actually listen to what you're doing, because like you said, it's a lot of work. So yeah, I guess nothing.
I love that. You own it. You know where you've come from and you know what you've achieved, and you've achieved great things, Dani.
Well, thank you. As you have too. I mean, that's why I wanted to speak to you, because I thought we need to do this mash up, because parallel lives and podcasts about books, we need to talk. We need to talk.
Absolutely. Fantastic. With the chance to interview anyone, who would it be?
Oh, that's such an interesting question, Claudine, because I had this list before I started. Jackie French was on that list, and Peter Goldsworthy was on that list, and Elliot Perlman, who I've loved his work for so much, was on that list. And of course, Tara Moss, I really admire her work. She was on the list. And, then we interviewed Matthew Riley, and I thought, I don't have a list anymore because, I've spoken to these amazing people. So instead of trying to keep having this disappearing bucket list, I think for me, I've stopped putting specific people on the list, and I've just really aim to have really deep or fun conversations with interesting people, because although I've, spoken to people like Matthew Riley and Jackie French and Trent Dalton, all those amazing people who have done some amazing work, I think what is as important is I've made some really good friendships and really connected with the people that I've interviewed who, these people have become friends who I speak to often, who I go out and, see socially. So I think, that is as equally as important, those friendships and connections you've made. So I've sort of taken away the list of people and I've replaced it with I just want to keep having conversations with interesting, inspiring people who love books, who want to reflect and change the world by putting out literature. And that's what I want to do. So I just want to keep having those conversations. Is that just way too deep?
No, not at all. I think that's wonderful. And look, I was going to say exactly, well, not exactly the same thing, but, in the same vein, somebody asked me not so long ago if you could interview anybody, who would you interview? And all the people that I had long admired and thought, wouldn't it be great if I could interview those people? I have interviewed them. And to the point now where, I said to my husband, if I stopped today, I'd be really happy because I've, overcome my own fears and insecurities by, putting aside that question, am I good enough? And, I have interviewed those people and I've done a decent job in doing that. And I've had a wonderful response to those interviews. And so that just makes me say, yep, if I didn't do another interview, I'd be super happy. Of course, I am still doing interviews. Please don't worry, everybody. Please don't email Dani. And I say, why are you stopping? I'm not stopping. But I'm just saying that if I something happened to me tomorrow and I couldn't interview anymore, then I'd be more than happy with the number of interviews that I've already done and the people that I've had the very great fortune to speak to already.
No, that's I totally agree with you. Yeah. And it becomes, of course, you still get excited and nervous about those kind of people. I mean, we were doing a live stream with Matthew Riley too. And I feel like I'm just terrible live. I don't know. So I was just, wide-eyed and just going, right, just stick to the questions, Dani. Do not veer from the questions and you'll be okay. But he was such a lovely down-to-earth guy that, but I just gave myself twice the stress because we said to the publisher, we'll live stream it. We'll get, bookshops involved. We'll then turn it into a podcast. We'll professionally produce it. So, we're selling all these things. Oh. And then I'm like, oh, God, now I've got to do a live stream with Matthew Riley. Well, I didn't do it all on my own. I know it's stressful just thinking about it, but I didn't do it on my own. It was Adrian Beck did all the producing because I said I can't think and do live stream and ask questions and look like I'm, not hyperventilating. I need some help here. So you have to do all the techie stuff.
Yeah. Which reminds me, I did, speaking of embarrassing or, stressful moments, I did a live book launch for Vanessa Carnevale, her beautiful book that she released last year. And we were doing a live Facebook streamed event. And it was a stormy day here in Sydney and didn't think anything of it. My husband, because on pain of death, nobody was allowed to make any noise in the house. The dogs were put away. Everyone was shut up in their rooms. My husband was like, I'd sworn him to absolute silence. He wasn't even allowed to watch the TV. So, the interview got going and we had all these people live. So fantastic. And the interview was going really brilliantly. I had about 5 minutes left to go. Unbeknownst to me, my husband had sneaked out. He thought, oh, look, I'm not going to be of any use here, so I'm just going to leave. Anyway, the storm hit and the electricity went out.
Oh, no.
5 minutes away from wrapping it up and I was dead. Like, no, there was a blank screen where I should have been. And we were just about to draw a winner of the book giveaway and everyone's going, where's Claudine gone? Where's Claudine gone? And, of course, I couldn't even get on. I couldn't do anything. I ran outside. It was pouring with rain. I was looking at the electricity fuse box trying to figure out how you were going to get back on. And it was just a nightmare. And I was just looking around thinking, where's everybody? Nobody got me. And it was just, honestly, the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me in relation to this podcast. But I mean, it all ended well, and everybody had a bit of a giggle. still can't live it down. I was still so nervous and I literally was sweating trying to get this thing up and running. But, them's the things that happen to podcasters.
That's it. And I think in 2020, we've all had those weird Zoom experiences where, it doesn't work, nothing works, or you can't hear someone, or someone's not on mute, or, there's always something. I often say, it's not a Zoom meeting unless someone isn't working or doing something wrong, or there's, something interruption, So we've done really well so far, Claudine. We've got Wi-Fi, we've got no interruptions, no thunder. So
not yet.
We should just wrap this up.
Absolutely.
So I do have a final question for you. What highlights of what are your book highlights for 2021 or 2020 so far?
Yeah, look, this was a really hard choice to make, but I think that so far I've read about 14 or 15 books so far this year, and I couldn't choose one, but the first one is The Funny Thing About Norman Foreman. I don't know if you can see this.
I can.
Julietta Henderson. Now, this book was sensational. Absolutely loved this, and I had the very great fortune of interviewing Julietta not so long ago, and that podcast should go live in the next week or so. I absolutely loved this book. And then the second one that I really, really enjoyed was Greg Woodland's The Night Whistler, which was,
I love that cover.
Stroke. Yeah, it's a fantastic book, and it was actually inspired by an event from Greg's childhood, which was so intriguing to me. I actually heard Greg speak at the Bad Crime Festival in Sydney last November, and I, quickly whipped out my business card and said, I'd really love to talk to you on the podcast as you do, and all my friends kind of just went, oh my God, she's doing it again.
Can't take her anywhere.
Can't take this woman anywhere. But they were two of my favourite reads so far this year. I mean, there are so many wonderful reads, but they're the two that stand out for me.
I think the books that I've really loved this year, I've probably read about 8 a month, I think. The Last Thing to Burn by Will Dean, that was incredible. I started it at about 6 p.m. and didn't put it down. I think I got up to make a cup of tea and that was it. I didn't move. I had to finish it and it was incredible. And I actually found myself physically on the edge of my lounge when I finished it. I was like, oh, I really was on the edge of my seat. Yes. So that was incredible. And I spoke to Will on the podcast, and he lives in this Swedish forest. And can you believe the internet was never better? Like sometimes I speak to people in Melbourne and the internet is terrible. And he was in Sweden. I'm like, how are we getting such great internet? He's like, oh, there's great internet here. So he was talking about, being an artist in the wilderness and how that inspired, his really creepy work and brilliant book. So if you get the chance, you won't just put your night aside because you won't put it down. And the other one I really loved was The Push by Ashley Audrain. That was amazing. Such an incredible voice at first person, present tense, really creepy. I just love a good crime thriller though, and just really beautifully written. So I loved The Push by Ashley Audrain. So they're probably two standouts for me, but you're right. You can't just, especially when you read so much, you can't just choose, two. But since we shouldn't speak till midnight, they'll be my two that I've just really loved this year. I feel like it's an industry that's given me so much as well, because I've grown up with literature. I've always loved books. They've always given me comfort. Someone said, they console you. And I think that's really true. Books console you in hard times, bring you joy in happy times, and they're always there. And, you go back, I always go back to the books that I loved because there's comfort in that, going back to familiarity and going back to things that you love or that resonate with you or that scare you or whatever. Claudine, I've just had the best chat with you. I'm so happy that we got to connect and speak about podcasting and books and all the things in our heads and what our week looks like and all those things. So I really had a great time. We should definitely do it again.
And I have absolutely loved chatting with you this evening. Thank you so much for having me on Words and Nerds.
Likewise, and I look forward to your upcoming episodes.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.